Coming up in the blink of an eye on Art Rocks, a Ruston artist reveals how experiencing a catastrophic earthquake in Nepal influenced his output.
The experience in Nepal was earth-changing for them, and therefore small paintings did not capture what we had experienced.
Some inside scoop into editing for major documentaries like those created by PBS's Ken Burns.
You know, when you pull out all the dull stuff and figure out a way to put all the dynamic stuff together, it suddenly pops, and you can make the audience feel like they're really there.
Plus some insight into the backdrop for the waterfall in Baton Rouge's Galvez Plaza. That's all coming up next on Art Rocks.
Like the impulse that drives an artist's creativity, Georgia Pacific's 850 Louisiana employees are driven to produce quality paper products for your home and business. Georgia Pacific is proud to support LPB and Art Rocks.
And by Lamar Advertising Company, proud to support the arts and Art Rocks. Headquartered in Baton Rouge, Lamar's 461 Louisiana employees have been helping brands and businesses reach their customers creatively for over 100 years.
Art Rocks is made possible by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
Hello, and thank you for being part of Art Rocks with me, James Fox Smith, publisher of Country Roads magazine. We're about to meet a Ruston, Louisiana artist who happened to be in Nepal on the day in 2015 when a magnitude 7.8 earthquake killed nearly 9,000 people and left another 20,000 injured. M. Douglas Walton says the experience was life-changing, particularly in the way he expresses himself in his art.
My second trip to Nepal in April of 2015, we had finished 3 weeks of touring in Nepal, and on that fateful day, April 25th, we were getting ready to leave and go into Tibet. We had stopped at the Friendship Bridge, which is the bridge linking the two countries. And then that's when the earthquake happened, which is this, a 7.9 earthquake. Boulders bigger than cars came down around us. And then for the next 6 days, we were in a refugee camp of 5,000 people, basically with nothing. But from the very beginning, the people in Nepal were smiling. There was no sadness, no weeping, total acceptance of the event. And then after being there for 6 days, seeing the spirit of the Nepalese people and the children picking roses every morning to take the petals and put on the pathways so that one walked on beauty and one did not experience the destruction. And the children gave us a 2-hour musical recital and treated us as their honored guest, with every building totally destroyed. And that whole experience became the most transformative experience of my life. That changed me, my paintings, my home, everything. The experience allowed me to totally surrender, to let go. And when one does that, one is then receiving the energy from above, and painting today now becomes a performance and simply not that painstakingly slow procedure of the paintbrush. So my paintings are now much faster, filled with more spirit, more energy, and less connected to the physical plane. The painting behind me is Passage, and it was painted just months before the Nepal earthquake, painted on June 5th, 2014, after a major experience on June 2nd. So when I did that painting, it was the first painting I truly let go. And the middle portion of that painting was done in 8 minutes. By far the fastest painting I had ever done in my career. And I painted it vertically, not realizing that the burning ship in the ocean was there. And that's the ship we have to get on and sail to a distant shoreline that we cannot see. And after Nepal, I realized, not only do we have to have the courage to make that trip, but we have to do it alone and take nothing with us. Because only when you have nothing do you truly understand that you have everything. So the painting symbolizes that spiritual journey. Moment, the black and white one in the living room, I knew I had to have a painting that symbolized the exact physical moment of the earthquake. And that was a difficult painting to paint because I knew I had to go back through the actual experience of the earthquake and revisit that moment. And that painting simply happened within minutes, with no planning, just paint. I see the bridge that connects Nepal and Tibet, the Friendship Bridge, and the whole feeling of the boulders coming down around us and on us, the bridge, basically the whole earth falling apart, the destruction of that which was. The experience in Nepal was earth-changing for them, and therefore small paintings did not capture what we had experienced. And the other aspect is spirit is expansive. So as the paintings gained energy, I realized that the paintings had to drastically increase in size. And every time I paint one, I feel like I need to extend it in some different ways. St. Mark's Basilica, done in Venice, Italy, and the original composition was done just before my mother's death. And it's the best painting of my early career when I was using watercolor and acrylic. And there's something magical about that painting that captures the multiple layering of the facade of St. Mark's. In the beginning, I was a semi-realistic painter, and that has now evolved into less and less connection to the physical form and more connected to the energy of the painting. So the new paintings have the poem of the composition. Where in my early career, I was doing epic compositions dealing with tens of thousands of shapes and complexity. Now that's reduced down to the essence of the poem with the spiritual energy carrying the painting. I didn't speak for 14 years of my life. I had the inability to pronounce consonants, and then when I was 14, my parents moved to Wichita, Kansas, and then I had my training at the Institute of Logopedics. And then I faced brutality and cruelty as a child and lived in my own world. But when people abused me, I always saw it as their problem and never as my problem. The painting aspect was the means by which I was able to begin the process of entering into the outside world that I had forever not dealt with.
If you're looking for opportunities to be affected by the visual and performing arts, Louisiana never lets you down. So here's a list of some of the festivals, the concerts and the exhibits headed your way in the weeks to come. To learn more about these and other events in Louisiana, pick up a copy of Country Roads magazine. Another resource, the Art Rocks website features every episode of the program, so just log on to lpb.org and follow the prompts. Whether it's cutting video or mixing sound, renowned American editor Paul Barnes has spliced together a career combining snippets of celluloid to create masterpieces of storytelling. Let's go into the studio with him to find out how he does it.
What do you love about editing?
I love taking the raw material that was shot and figuring out how to put it together to make it dramatic and dynamic or comic, or, to make this raw footage that when you look at it often seems very dull, but then by the judicious editing of it, you can suddenly bring it to life. I get into this funny kind of Zen headspace in a way, where the world disappears, and honestly, all I can think of is what's in the screen. And I'm totally absorbed in that, and it's like, how do I make this work? What's the next shot I should go to? What's the best piece of music? Do I need a sound effect here to punch something in? Should I put in the close-up here? Is that the right image? And the wheels on my head are going like crazy. But there's something about the creativity of all that it's very satisfying to me. And when you see the end product, when you finish the scene and it's working well, and you've taken all the things that weren't working out, and all of a sudden the director's intention was coming through, the actor's intention was coming through, the story intention was coming through, it's very gratifying, it really is.
How can the art and style of editing change certain stories?
First of all, the script is like a blueprint, and then the dailies are like raw material. They're not finished works in and of themselves. And in documentary, it's all in the editing. Everything is so raw. I mean, if you watch some of the raw footage of Vietnam, it's like some of the sequences where they were shooting, in a battle area, there's a lot of dull stuff where the cameraman was hiding behind a tree and, following some troops, but nothing was happening. There's some distant shooting, but, and then every once in a while there'd be a little scuffle, a little skirmish, and when you pull out all the dull stuff and figure out a way to put all the dynamic stuff together, it suddenly pops, and you can make the audience feel like they're really there by the way in which you cut it.
One of the things that I learned in the war is that we're not the top species on the planet because we're nice. We are a very aggressive species. It is in us. And people talk a lot about how, the military turns, kids into, killing machines and stuff. And I'll always argue that it's just finishing school.
When's the time that you felt editing has helped tell the story in a more impactful way?
For example, to go back to the Civil War, which was, the second film I worked on with Ken. Gettysburg is an important pivot in the war. And we had to rely on paintings, which is a difficult thing to do. But there are some very famous Gettysburg paintings. There's the Gettysburg diorama that is preserved at the park now. And we went there and shot a lot of close-ups of different actions from the battle. And I think the combination of the voices that related a part of the battle with the strong narrative that Jeff wrote, but in conjunction with the battle sound effects and then the quick cutting of even the painting images, it brought the battle to life in an incredibly interesting way. And Ken and I were both thinking, you know, it's so hard to make paintings work. We were really scared. We thought we're not going to be able to do the Battle of Gettysburg really well. It worked like gangbusters.
Suddenly, the Union artillery on Cemetery Ridge and Little Round Top opened fire, and a great moan went up from the Confederate line. We could not help hitting them at every shot, a Federal officer recalled. As many as 10 men at a time were destroyed by a single bursting shell.
You have for many years brought the human experience to these films and projects. How important is it to tell these stories?
Oh, it's hugely important, I think. What Ken does that I love is, and as he describes it, he calls it emotional archaeology. It's like if you want people to learn history, make them feel it. So it's not just tell the facts and figures, but it's explore the underlying emotions of what was happening at the time, with the individual characters, with the events. And if you can bring the feeling out, then it really hits an audience. And so that, you know, the experience of FDR having polio, I think you really feel that in the Roosevelt series. I mean, there are tons of moments in Vietnam that you're going to feel like gangbusters because you feel like you're in the Battle of Ia Drang, or you feel like you're on the street photographing the girl who got hit by napalm. You're in the moment when that Vietnamese police officer shot the man in the street. It's all of those moments just come alive and hit you in the gut and hit you in the heart. And when you affect the audience emotionally and bring history alive like that, then it means more, and people think about it more, they remember it more, and it becomes more a part of their consciousness. And I think they carry that with them into events that are happening now and what's going on in the world now. So I think it's vital to be telling these stories.
As an editor, you spend all this time with other people's stories and looking back at history, people's stories now, people's stories in the past. What has that taught you about yourself and about being a human being?
To be able to really study the ins and outs of these people's personalities, the complexity of these historical decisions, and the fraught politics in so many periods of our history. It's time and again you get inspired by the story of these great American men and women who really have helped to develop and create the democracy that we have and the kind of country that we have. It's incredibly inspiring. And I think it's made me a better human being across the board. I'm much more compassionate, I'm much more empathetic, I'm much more willing to look at the gray areas of things and not immediately go to the white or black of any issue, to want to see what the other side's point of view is, to figure out a compromise. I think all those things history can teach you. And so, yeah, it's been a great journey in that regard. So I do feel like it's made me a better person.
It was so nice to talk with you about editing and your process and your career. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Back here at home now for our latest Louisiana Treasures segment. Baton Rouge's Galvez Plaza is often the site for outdoor concerts and public gatherings, but it's also hard to miss the beautiful artwork in that plaza, including a backdrop for the water feature created by the late, great Baton Rouge sculptor Frank Hayden. One of his former students, Ben Peabody, is proud to own a miniature copy of exactly this piece.
I have a piece of Frank Hayden's, and this was actually the mold that he used as one of the pieces that he was able to show people what the finished product would look like. And this is just a small piece that he did of the replica of what he did down at the Galvez Plaza. And this was Frank's technique, the way he would do it out of plaster. He would make a small piece out of plaster that he could take and show to whoever was buying the piece, you know, this is what the finished product is going to look like. And fortunately, when I was working with Frank out at school, he kept saying, "Ben, take something, take something." I would say, "Frank, I don't want to take any of your stuff." He says, "Oh, no, just take that. That's just an old piece I have." And he was always wanting me to take just something free for him, and I never wanted to, and I wound up with that piece, and it was just one of the pieces that I could have had many, many. Now I wish I had collected everyone he wanted to give me, I would have taken, because his work's highly collectible now. Well, the piece is down there is a bronze sculpture, and it's some 30, 40 feet long, and decorates the fountain there. And so that piece, you know, he sends to a foundry and has that cast. But then he also sends a piece like that to the foundry so they know exactly what it's going to look like as, you know, they produce it. And this is, you know, kind of like the mini model what he does. He works on those probably was 6 months to a year for a piece like that. I mean, it was a long time for him to do pieces like that.
From Baton Rouge, it's a relatively short trip across to Houston, Texas, to meet artist Suzie Rosmarn. She's the mastermind behind exquisite geometric paintings that rely on mathematical equations, repetition and geometry to create colourful, dynamic illusions that pulsate with matrices of colour and light. Get ready, because you're about to enter another dimension.
I mean, it's sort of transcendence, I think, is something that we all are often always looking for. Whether we're finding it in love or in some sort of spiritual search. I happen to look for it in art. I was living in New York, and there was a big Monet retrospective, and I was looking at the Cathedral of Chartres series, and they fascinated me, because when you were up close they were one thing, and when you got back they were something else altogether different. For me, the attempt to reconcile those two realities just catapulted me into this other reality, and I wanted something like that in my work. So op art, or also known as optical art, is a movement that started in the 60s with early people like Bridget Riley and Victor Vasarely, Richard Anaskevich. It's about the phenomena, the nature of perception, and about how the eye can be fooled. On this one, you can see that the edge seems to push in and out against here, and it also seems to warp out, warp and weave this way, coming towards you. You know, I didn't set out to make op art. It just, my work just happened to be heading in that direction at a time when that became an interest, you know, of a lot of other artists as well. Okay, so now I'm going to do 2632. So that starts here. 1990, 1991, I'd been working with this number system for a long time. It's just a very simple number game with just numbers 1 through 9, and laid out in a 3x3 matrix like on a telephone or an adding machine. And I discovered that if you did these little diagrams and then rotated the little drawing, rotated that little sketch 4 times around that 3x3 matrix, you get this consistent sum, like 22,220, every single time, and that just fascinated me. And so I tried every possible permutation of that. I mean, I'd started when I was 13, and by then I was like 40, and I've been doing them as paintings. It took me a long time to figure out how to get them on canvas. One morning in 1990, I just woke up with the solution. And the solution was to do a full-scale drawing on a piece of Mylar, and then glue it to the back of a canvas, shine a light through it, and that way I could see where the lines were on the drawing, and I could tape over that so that I could reproduce the drawing absolutely. That's how they got onto canvas. taping itself is actually a very meditative process. And I know people look at my work, the finished product, especially the ones that are optically so active. They'll ask me, like, how do you do that? Because it makes your eyes so crazy. And it's like, no, when I'm working, there's really only one color at a time on the surface. And it's actually very meditative. It's a very relaxing process. Most painters, when they're painting, they're constantly building a new surface, creating their new surface as they work. For someone like me, I'm constantly covering up my surface because you lay down a layer of paint, then you tape where you want to preserve that color before you put the next layer of paint down. So for tapers, you're constantly covering up your surface and you don't know what you've got until you actually pull off that last bit of tape. So it's always a little bit of a surprise. So in this painting in particular, this is about as minimal as an op art painting can get because it's a pale gray and white. It's just very simple progression of shapes. What it's about for me is something that's here and gone and yet forever here. It's sort of like the breath, breathing in and out. I think that's the whole point. Whatever it is that makes your brain tingle and your heart set, everything, just everything, your visceral response, your intellectual response, the reason to make art. That and sex. It is about that transcendent, that epiphany, that sort of experience. I mean, that's why we do what we do, right?
And that is that for this edition of Art Rocks. But remember, you can always watch episodes of the show at lpb.org/artrocks. And if you can't get enough culture, Country Roads magazine makes a great resource for getting up close and personal with the visual and performing arts experiences close to home and all around the state. Until next week, I've been James Fox Smith, and thanks for watching.